Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Really glad you're here. Hope you're doing okay. Hope your family's doing good. I want to start off here. Let's start off with some good news, perhaps, because we're going to bounce back and forth because no one knows. We don't know. We're doing the best we can. Everyone is. But I want to start here. This is from Yanir Butteryam. This is someone I've been following from, well, I was at the beginning of this, but for the last few weeks I've been following this guy. He's really been out in front of it. He's a physicist by trade, but he also studies pandemics. So he looked at the numbers and found out that 1 week after Italy's national lockdown, Italy has now 3 days with the same number of new cases. Now, the numbers are really hard. It's hard to determine number of cases and new cases, and all this is tricky. But 3 days with the same number of new cases. That means that 5 days after the lockdown, the cases leveled off, which is consistent with the thought that the incubation period is about 3 to 5 days. So that's good news. Now, right, does that make sense? Right, so the cases are starting to level off in Italy, we think. Now, it's not over because the hospitals are already full. And if you now get sick, because people are still going to get sick, right? The number of new cases, but that means there's still new cases. So any new cases from this point, you're going to go to a hospital, you need intensive care, and you can't because it's full. And one intensive care visit can take weeks. I've heard as long as 4 weeks in intensive care. And obviously that can vary too. But if someone gets sick today or next week, tomorrow, and needs a respirator and they go to the hospital, there's none left. So what does a hospital do? And you can think about it theoretically, right? You can think about a big picture. But what do you do now if that's your mom? And your mom's 65, like not that old, right? And then there's someone on the respirator who's 80 and a smoker. And you're like, I want my mom to get that respirator. That person's not getting any better. Kick them off. Right? How do you do that? Those issues are gonna. Those aren't like business school hypothetical questions to gauge your morality and think. This is real life right now, and these issues are gonna go on for months. I want to play this video here. This video can be hard to watch. This is the first video that I've seen from inside Italy. Now, we've been talking about Italy. We've been saying we got to look to Italy, where they're about 10 days in front of us. Italy, Italy, Italy. But I haven't seen anything from Italy yet until this video. Bad sign when you got people in the hallway there. That's like half the video. It goes on. And I've also never seen, I didn't even imagine when I was making this visual in my head of the people laying there, but looks like they got these things over their head. I don't even. We have reports from internal emails and from transcripts of a staff meeting at by Rosalind Adams at the, what's it called? Sorry, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in Manhattan, that they have 3 patients with COVID and 5 employees. At least that's what we know. We have very limited testing. That's at a cancer hospital. Means there's people there with weakened immune systems. And that hospital only has a week's worth of masks. And they think it's going to be 4 to 8 weeks before they get new masks. And it's not like this is a localized natural disaster where hospitals from New Jersey can send over their masks to meet the need because the hospitals in New Jersey need them. So, starting, I want to talk about testing here for a minute. This is where America's been woefully behind, has been, still is. And it's actually one of the reasons why we have mass quarantine measures, because we don't know who to quarantine. right? We can't be specific with the quarantining because we don't know who has it because we don't have the tests. In South Korea and some other countries, but particularly in South Korea, they tested everyone. They tested 20,000 people a day, right? They're taking temperatures of everyone wherever you go. I saw people, they like stopped to get gas. They're at a gas station and they're getting their temperature taken to see if they have a fever. And if they do, then they go right to quarantine right away. So if you can get in front of this like South Korea and some other countries did, as other Asian countries, then you can quarantine those very specific people. And you could also quarantine high-risk people, right? So you could quarantine people over 70, for instance. And then everyone else could go on with their life. We wouldn't need to shut down the global economy because of it. But because, and I'm not totally blaming the CDC for this, although yes, but also it's all very new, right? So, but it's just the reality of it. We didn't do the testing. We haven't been doing the testing. So we don't know who has it. So we just got to shut down entire cities. This is a doctor who spent weeks fighting COVID in Wuhan. Here's what he has to say about testing.
Test, test, and test. Whenever you have no chance to do the test, I mean the nucleic acid test for COVID-19, you never know who is the carrier, who is the patient, and you never know who should be quarantined and who are close contact. The Chinese approach for control of the epidemics may not be the only one. Apart from testing, I just have no idea how you can identify the suspected cases and how to quarantine.
Hey, you can't. So that's why we just quarantined everyone. And after quarantining everyone, like, will we ever be able to compute the economic ramifications of that? Of course, lives lost too, right? But the economic ramifications, like, nothing like this ever happened. So lack of testing has led to a lack of precision for quarantines. So that's why we have to have everyone stay at home. And I've heard the analogy that quarantining, it's like holding your breath, right? We need to do it, right? It's like holding your breath. You can't do it forever. I'm grateful for all the scientists and everyone working on testing and drugs and vaccines and all the amazing technology that we need. We need that because you can't hold your breath forever. You can't quarantine forever. That's the good news. So now some not as good news. This is a report from Imperial College in London. This is one of the main reports that they used in England. They're using now in England, I should say, as they're kind of changing their strategy a bit here. But here's what it says. It says, here we present the results of epidemiological modeling, which has informed policy making in the UK and other countries in recent weeks. Now, before we play some of the graphs and everything in the models are inherently, I was gonna say broken, but that incomplete, right? There's way too many variables at play to accurately project what's gonna happen in the future. It's impossible to account for human behavior properly. It's impossible to know all the knowns of an unknown virus, right? Like but this is the best we have. And if nothing else, even if you don't think that this modeling that I'm gonna show you here from the Imperial College, even if you don't think that this is gonna happen, this is what the governments in the UK and America are basing their decisions off of. So at least you know why the government, the federal government, and on down, everything the federal government does trickles down to the locals. You know why the federal government's doing these things because of these models right here. So here's the bad news. Now, let me just quote. In the unlikely absence of any control measures or spontaneous changes in individual behavior. Okay, I want to emphasize this. This is if no one changed anything. This is if we just went ignorantly about our day and no one even knew that there was a virus and we just went on with everything, all right? Which is not the case. We do know there are quarantines, right? But this is like worst case scenario if we just went on with our life. We would expect a peak in mortality, death rates, to occur after approximately 3 months. Given an estimated R0 of 2.4, that means one person will infect 2.4 other people. We predict that 81% of the Great Britain and US populations would be infected over the course of the epidemic, 81%. In total, in an unmitigated epidemic, again, if we did nothing, we would predict approximately 500,000 deaths in England and 2.2 million in the United States, not accounting for the potential negative effects of health systems being overwhelmed on mortality, which means if you get a heart attack and you go to the hospital and the hospital is overwhelmed, like it wouldn't account for those deaths as well. So that, again, that's if nothing changed in our lives. The good news is we did take efforts, obviously. We shut down entire cities and more happening. So, you with me so far? So, bad news, Bad. 2.2 million people would die if we did nothing. Good news, we did something. Now we'll go back to some bad news. I want to show this graph on page 8 of this report. This is critical care beds occupied per 100,000 of the population on the vertical, and then horizontal is time. This is in England, but we're about the same. There's not a big difference. The blue on the graph, like the blue shading, represents 3 months that these particular measures are put in place. All right? So the black line, the biggest one, that's if we do nothing. And you see the peak of people needing care. Not good. The next line, the next lowest is green. That's if we close schools, right? So you see a little bit of the flattening the curve that you've heard so much about, right? Underneath that would be case isolation, which is what we just talked about. That's, you have a fever, you need to stay home. Right? Then the next lower line, it's like a gold, like a light yellow gold, case isolation and household quarantine. So that's more people staying home. And then the next one is the everything, like full on, the blue line. That's like game on, that's what we're doing right now. So you can see it. The good news is all the critical care beds needed goes down with everything we do. You look at the difference between doing nothing and the case isolation, home quarantine, social distancing, et cetera, et cetera. So that's good news. Here's the bad news. See the red line? Do you see the red line? I didn't even see it at first. The what red line? The straight line way at the bottom. That's the health system's capacity. Anything above that line, you're over capacity. Everything we do is over capacity. Nothing we can do at this point gets us under that red line. So every graph you've seen, so let's just pause on that for a second. You with me? Now, huge difference between doing nothing and doing something, right? But still, we can't get under that line. So this graph that you've seen a lot of, do we have the flatten the curve graph, guys? The GIF that we played on the show the other day? Yeah. So you've seen graphs like this by now, right? The whole flatten the curve thing. So again, the purple is people over the horizontal line, the horizontal yellow line is our capacity. Anything over the capacity is very, very bad. Purple, those are people who are not gonna get the proper care they need, so we need to flatten the curve, spread out the number of people who get it over a longer period of time, blah, blah, blah. The problem with graphs like that is, if you notice, there's no numbers. There's no numbers. So that's not a scientific graph, and that's not a projection. That's just a representation. That's a visual representation. That's just a tool to help you visualize what the goal is of flattening the curve. But when you plug numbers into the graph, which is what Imperial College did in England, which is what we did, right? Critical care beds occupied, time, right? When you put actual things on the X and Y axes, then you start to see, ooh, you flatten that curve, you don't actually get below that capacity line. Take a break here. I want to come back. We're going to talk to Matt Walsh today, which I'm really excited about. I want to talk about the human nature of all this, right? The human nature aspect of why some people don't believe this, some people do, who quarantines, who doesn't quarantine, and Matt Walsh is the perfect person to talk to about that. We got that coming up later in the show. True story, Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to pick up with our analysis of this model that was put out by Imperial College. You can agree with the model or not, but even if you don't, it's at least important to know what this is so that you know what England and America is using to make the decisions that they've been making these last couple days and weeks. So one thing that this analysis that Imperial College in England put out, one thing it assumes, and I think rightfully, is that any efforts we take now, we don't know how many people get the virus, get sick, and then get healthy and are now immune, right? We don't know anything about COVID immunity. Again, real quick, do we have the picture of the virus? I'm not calling it coronavirus anymore because coronavirus, as we mentioned earlier, is a family of different viruses, MERS, SARS. But but if we have the picture of the virus here, the reason this one's called coronavirus is because of the shape of it. So all those little like spike things, corona means crown in Greek. So they're little crowns on top of the virus. Viruses all look very, very, very different. So that's why it's the family of viruses called coronavirus. Anyway, we don't know how long COVID immunity lasts. So chickenpox, you've heard this before. We all have this idea that once you get chickenpox, you never get it again. So you have lifetime immunity. It's not exactly true. My understanding is it's something like 10 to 20 year immunity, but then we all have herd immunity. Whatever, long story. But SARS immunity, which is another type of coronavirus, it lasts 2 to 3 years, we think. OC43 and HKU1, other type of coronaviruses, it's just a cold when you get it. You're immune, you get it, and you're immune for less than a year. So if you get coronavirus, you get COVID, if you get COVID, and then you get healthy again, we don't know. We don't know how long you stay immune for. The entire British strategy is based on this idea of herd immunity, but that requires a lot of assumptions. And one of the assumptions is that once you get it, you can't get it twice. We don't know. So I say this because the Imperial College, they're predicting, and I think correctly, they're predicting a reemergence of COVID. And it's just something we got to wrap our head around. Here's what they said in the study we've been talking about. Once interventions are relaxed, so once everyone goes back on with their life, infections will begin to rise, resulting in a predicted peak epidemic later in the year, this winter. The more successful a strategy is at temporary suppression, so the more successful we are now at keeping everyone quarantined and keeping it from spreading, the larger the later epidemic is predicted to be in the absence of a vaccination, due to lesser buildup of herd immunity, right? So it's like, oh, this is so complicated, so tricky. The better job we do now of quarantining people and keeping it from spreading means potentially the worse it could be this winter. Jeez. And that's why I made this video yesterday. It's on the first Twitter. The president had a press conference, and he mentioned August. This could all go on till August. And I thought, August? What are we talking August? August seems like years from now. What are we talking? I was like, I'm not mentally prepared for August. I mean, I don't have enough food to get us through 5 months, but I'm sure we can, we'll get some more food somehow. But I'm not even I can't even wrap my head around August. So we got to not only prepare physically, but also mentally and emotionally for months of this. I'm not saying months of quarantining, but months of just like this. How can we wrap our head around that? And anyway, so I put a video on that yesterday on Twitter, and people are like, "Oh, Slater, you an idiot. He didn't say the quarantine would last 6 months. He said the virus could last 6 months." Listen, first of all, no one knows anything. But it seems like that's not even true. It could be way longer than 6 months. This whole thing could come back around. It could go away and then come back up this winter after 6 months. So get ready for the long haul. One last quick point, and then we're going to change gears. This is Balaji Srinavisayan on Twitter. I'm sorry, buddy. I'm sorry, sir. I'm for butchering your name. But he made the point that this is not like a normal anything. I made the point that humans don't like the unknown, so we try to put things in a box that we know. So I grew up with blizzards. Blizzards last weekend, we battened down the hatches, we emerged 2 days later, and everything's fine. We understand hurricanes and tornadoes. So we try to put this thing in that box, but it's not, it's different. This is months, we've never experienced anything like that. So this is the guy, he made this point that the normal defenses fail, right? So like if there's a traditional war, right? We have a box for that. That's not what this is, because normal defenses fail. Walls don't work, really. I mean, yes, walls prevent people from coming over, but you know what I mean. It can't be bombed. Bank accounts can't be frozen. Can't put sanctions on it. Has unbreakable morale. There's no supply chain you can disrupt. Lives off the land. It's got infinite resources. It's fully decentralized. How do you beat something like that? Well, that's the best we got right now, what we're doing. I want to change gears here. I got to end this before we get to Matt Walsh and another guest. I love all these videos, and every day I'm going to play one. This time it's in Israel. These are people now having balcony parties. Listen, I can question the musical the musical choices of the moment. But it's all good, right? I like the effort there. We have to always, even in the midst of this, especially in the midst of this, be grateful, right? Not grateful for coronavirus. That's not right. I'm not going to go there. But grateful in the midst of it. It's always proper to be grateful in the midst of anything. Let's be grateful that it's 2020. Let's be grateful that we know a lot about viruses more than ever. Most plagues in history, we didn't know anything. We didn't know anything about germ theory. We didn't know anything about viruses. I'm grateful we live now, and we do. I'm grateful we live in America. With all of our problems, there's no place I'd rather be. Is there any place you'd rather be? Is anyone hopping on a plane like, I got to get out of this place? I got to go to a different country? No one's doing that. People have made this political, right? But there's get over that, right? I'm not about that. I'm not thinking about that at all. None of us should be. We need a much bigger perspective than the political games of the moment or of this coming election. I came across this quote this weekend. It's from the great C.S. Lewis. It doesn't get any better than that. He wrote an essay in 1948. Here's what he said. How are we to live in the atomic age? I'm tempted to reply, why, as you would have lived in the 16th century when the plague visited London every year. Or as you would have lived in the Viking Age, when raiders from Scandinavia might land and cut your throat any night. Or indeed, as you're already living in an age of cancer, an age of syphilis, an age of paralysis, an age of air raids, an age of railway accidents, an age of motor accidents. In other words, do not let us begin by exaggerating the novelty of our situation. Believe me, dear sir or madam, you and all whom you love were already sentenced to death before the atomic bomb was invented. And quite a high percentage of us were going to die in unpleasant ways. It is perfectly ridiculous to go about whimpering and drawing long faces because the scientists have added one more chance of painful and premature death to a world which already bristled with such chances, and in which death itself was not a chance at all, but a certainty. This is the first point to be made, and the first action to be taken is to pull ourselves together. If we are all going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let that bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things. Praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts. Not huddled together like frightened sheep and thinking about bombs. They may break our bodies, but they need not dominate our minds. C.S. Lewis. Heard a great sermon on Sunday, Dr. David Jeremiah, to an empty house. He had 6 points. The first one is keep praying, as C.S. Lewis said there as well. But he quoted Jehoshaphat, who's not, as a name in the Bible that's not often given. I don't hear a lot of Jehoshaphat's out there on the playground. But he prayed to God. He said, if calamity comes upon us, whether the sword of judgment or plague or famine, he said, we will stand in your presence before the temple that bears your name, and we will cry out to you in our distress, and you will hear us and save us. But I love this last line at the end of his prayer. He said, this is in Chronicles, he said, for we have no power to face the vast army that is attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. And that's all of us now. That's every scientist, every doctor. We don't know what to do. We're doing the best we can. I don't know if they're keeping their eyes on God. I hope they are. But we're powerless in the face of a vast army. We're trying our best. We're doing the best we can. We're praying that scientists find a vaccine. We're praying for healthcare workers, people on the front lines, praying for people who are sick. There's no cures right now. We don't know what to do. But we're going to keep our eyes on you. Coming up next, Matt Walsh. He has a new book. I don't know if this is the worst time to come out with a new book or the best time to come out with a new book, but either way, Matt Walsh is awesome and deserves our time. So we're talking to him coming up next. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. My favorite political commentator is Matt Walsh. He has a new book, Church of Cowards, a wake-up call to complacent Christians. Matt, how are you, brother?
Doing well, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Good to talk to you. So the reason why you're my favorite commentator, and I'm not just blowing smoke, is I think you're the boldest. You write stories about things that I've thought, and I am too scared to mention. So I want to ask you, I've always wondered this. I am my personality flaw, and which is not a good business to be in, is I really care what people think about me, and I want people to like me. That's right. I really want everyone to like me, which is an issue. You don't seem to care so much when you just throw it out there. Talk me through that. How do you work through that?
But yeah, the weird thing is I actually want people to like me too. I guess I'm just really bad at getting them to. I don't know how to make that happen, I suppose. No, I think, look, everybody likes to be liked. I don't think anybody enjoys being hated. If I enjoyed being hated by people, I think that would be a serious character flaw. That'd be an even bigger flaw than enjoying being liked. But at the same time, I think that first of all, there are just some truths and some realities that need to be expressed. And I also realize that, look, at the end of the day, it's not like people are, at least at this point, people aren't breaking down my door, throwing bricks in my windows. Maybe that time will come. But for the most part now, if people hate me, it just means mostly that they're sending, angry messages or frowny face emojis or something. It's like that. That's the majority of the hate. It's all online. It's out there. And really, it's ultimately pretty easy to kind of tune out and just live your life, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess that ties into your book too, right? When you talk about martyrs, right? Those are people who actually were facing real confrontation, as opposed to mean emojis. I want to get to you. Go ahead. Do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, no, I just think that's an important dichotomy when you see what actual heroism looks like in other parts of the world, especially when people stand up for their beliefs. And then you compare it to here and what we face. It really makes it, I think, pretty obvious that it's really not so hard after all to stand for what's right here.
Good to have the perspective. I want to get to your book in a second, but I want to ask you a question about human nature in relation to COVID here. So I was tracking with you a couple weeks ago about when this first started percolated. I remember remember Ebola and all these other hoaxes, truly, that came out and people freaked out and panicked or whatever. And you and I were about tracking the same time when we were like, oh, this is different. But it was so interesting how many people were stuck in their initial judgment of it and would not and will not change their mind truly no matter what. What's up? Like, it's an interesting, tribal, just human nature. Like, what is it to take people to, why do they stick in their opinions? What does it take to get people to change their minds?
Yeah, I think especially in this environment with the media and the internet and everything, it's like something happens and everybody chooses their side. They choose what their take is going to be, and then you just defend your take to the death, no matter what it is. That's just the way it works now for whatever reason. I think it's pretty stupid. I mean, obviously, with something like the coronavirus, when we first started hearing about it, we didn't know very much about it. Even the scientists still don't know everything about it. They're still learning. So I think to be wrong about it a month ago is okay. To be wrong about it yesterday is okay. It's okay to change your mind and realize that, look, this is obviously wrong. It's not like, and I'm not trying to deflect the blame, but we had reason to suspect a month ago, 2 months ago, that this was more media hype, because it's not like the media hasn't done this before, where they hype something up. You mentioned Ebola. Think about all the natural disasters and hurricanes that end up fizzling out. So, it was reasonable to think maybe this is one of those things. It's not, clearly, and so you just say, hey, I was wrong, and the reality is the reality.
So I made a challenge, because about half my radio audience is still, at least a couple days ago, this is no big deal, you're overblowing it, you're falling for the media hype, and blah, blah, blah. So I said, okay, all right, I'm not going to convince you anymore, it's not my job. So my only challenge was, to everyone who still thinks it's a hoax, is come up with some sort of standard. Like, when I see this happen, then I'll know it's more than a hoax. When I don't care what it is. When I see this many dead bodies, when I see this many whatever, then I'll know it's a big deal. But then I had to flip it around on me, and I want to flip it to you. What would it take for you to not see, or for you to see, to you be like, oh, you know what? We did kind of let it get out of, maybe we did blow it out of proportion too much. Maybe we went too far. Would anything maybe change your mind going back the other way?
Well, at this point, first of all, my official position right now on this is I really don't know. I honestly, I don't know. There's a lot of there's a lot about this that is beyond my pay grade in terms of the science and how viruses work and the exponential growth rate and how if something is is a bigger concern than something like the flu. I think that it involves some expertise. I'm not saying that only scientists and doctors should have an opinion about it, but in terms of the people that are proclaiming, and prognosticating publicly, I think we should, as much as possible, leave it to the doctors. So I'm not exactly sure. The problem is, though, that if a month from now we're looking around and saying, "Hey, this didn't end up being as bad as everyone thought," well, the assumption is going to be among the skeptics that, well, clearly I was right all along. But it could easily be the case that the measures that were taken prevented what could have been much worse. And so how are we going to know what could have been had these things not happened? I don't think we could possibly know that. So I guess the answer is, at this point, there'd be no way to know.
Yeah. Let's get to the book. Church of Cowards. What have you seen in our culture that caused you to even want to write this?
Well, I think I see the same thing that every other Christian does. We look around, we see a culture that is clearly not a Christian culture, even though we're a majority Christian nation. The church is on the decline in terms of attendance, and even beyond that, when you talk to Christians and see and hear, what do they actually believe? Do they actually accept the tenets of the Christian faith, the basic doctrines that Christians have always believed? And that number is shockingly low. So that much is clear. The question is, why is that happening? And that's what I wrote the book about, to try to offer my own sort of diagnosis on how we got to this point. And I think, there are many different answers to it. I get into it in the book. But at a really basic, fundamental level, I think it's that we have become a very complacent church. We've become moral cowards, many of us, and we're sort of just floating along with the culture, not resisting, not fighting back, being quote unquote tolerant, and we're going wherever the culture takes us, and this is where it's taken us.
I feel like we've placed as the highest virtue, not tolerance, yes, and also just being comfortable. We just want to be comfortable all the time, but that can't possibly be a virtue.
Yeah, well, being comfortable and also helping other people be comfortable and not ever interfering with another person's comfort. That's the virtuous part of it. But we say, well, but just let people live their lives. Don't interfere. Don't say anything to make them uncomfortable. But that's certainly not a Christian virtue. We know that it's like it says in Scripture. St. Paul says, love is the highest of all, the highest thing of all. And what is love? Love is to will the good of the other. It's to want the best for a person and to try to help them in their pursuit of the best. And as Christians, we know that what is the best ultimate thing is it happens in eternity, not in this life. And so if we're trying to help people and ourselves get there, then that's going to mean sometimes sacrifice and being uncomfortable in this life. And you have to be willing to accept that if you want to be consistent with the Christian message.
Yeah, I've been doing some research on this idea of moralistic therapeutic deism. It's kind of the religion of the millennial or whatever of the day. And you have a chapter here called My Buddy Jesus. I feel like that ties into each other. How are people today viewing Jesus as opposed to what Scripture and what he really is?
Yeah, I think we see Jesus as a sort of a hippie kind of character, peacenik. People say things like, you hear all the time, people say things like, well, Jesus hung out with sinners. He was always hanging out with sinners. And yeah, he was around sinners, of course, because everybody's a sinner. But I think the phrase hanging out or hung out is very instructive, because it makes it sound like he was just sitting on the curb all day with his homies, just kicking back and not doing anything. No, he was ministering to sinners. He was leading them. He was calling them to repentance. He was calling them to a more moral life. That's what he was doing. He wasn't just hanging around. And that is the impression that we have, is that he was just a very non-confrontational, peaceful person. And the thing is, when you actually open up the Gospels, which I would recommend doing, especially if you're a Christian, maybe actually read them, and you'll find that Jesus was shockingly confrontational. In fact, he was constantly going around confronting people. He was oftentimes rather abrasive, it would even seem like, but for good reason, because he was trying to sort of get people out of their moral stupor.
Yeah. One reason I love your commentary so much is you do such a good job of like bringing clarity to lazy things that I've said or things I've heard forever and just sort of started saying just because I've been floating around in the culture or whatever, right? So like an idea like hanging out, right? He hung out with sinners. Like, I'm sure I've said that before, or I certainly have thought that before. And you're like, oh wait, that's hanging out. That's not right. Can you think of any other like lazy turns of phrase that people have been saying without even really thinking that you're like, oh no, wait, that's not accurate?
Well, in terms of in terms of faith and in the Christian realm, I think there are plenty of them. I mean, the other one I talk about in that chapter is people say my personal relationship with Jesus. Very common phrase. And the thing is, in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that phrase. It's true that we should have a personal relationship with Jesus. But I think when people say it, you should pay attention to the word that they emphasize, because oftentimes people say it defensively and they'll say, this is my personal relationship with Jesus, emphasis on the my. And what they mean is, or what they seem to mean is, I'm calling the shots. I get to decide how this thing works. This is my thing. It's mine. But no, really the emphasis should be on Jesus. This is my personal relationship with Jesus. Jesus is the one leading it, and it's up to me to conform to him, not the other way around. And so I think that's, maybe another example.
Perfect example. Okay, last question. What do you want the average person to get out of this book? I read it. How does my life change? How does my posture towards the culture and towards the world change after reading it? What's your goal?
Well, I hope really simply that people leave the book, put the book down, just like I did after I finished writing it, especially just feeling convicted to try to live their belief system, for their belief to be not just something that's in their head or something that they feel, but something that they actually live on a day-to-day basis, and something that is obvious to those around them. And so I guess that if I had to sum it up, I'd say that I hope that that's what people take away from it.
It's good. We need to feel convicted more. I feel like we're not. Church of Cowards, wake up call to complacent Christians. Matt Walsh, keep up the awesome work, brother. We'll talk again.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, man. True story. Mike Slater, more coming up. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to talk to our next guest because anything I think we can do to help get a better kind of visualization of what's happening, because this is, as we talked about earlier, this doesn't fit in any box that we've ever experienced in our life. So we got to make a new box. And how do we visualize what this virus is all about, has been, and will be? So I want to go to Alexander Fleiss, CEO of Rebellion Research, and he teaches AI at Cornell University. So I know we'll talk again more about AI moving forward. Mr. Fleiss, how are you, sir?
Oh, doing great. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, good to talk to you. So I read your article about the coronavirus super spreader and super spreaders. What do we need to know in order for that to make sense? And then what is a super spreader?
Well, first of all, the idea of a super spreader is hundreds of years old. It first came about with the typhoid fever in 1850s. Typhoid Mary spread to 55 different adults around New York City, and she never even felt symptoms. So also, in terms of a new box, I actually caution viewers to say that, listen, the coronavirus has been around for a while. This has been dealt with by medical professionals. And super spreaders are an idea from 170 years ago. And not an idea, it's a proven situation. And that's what we've seen here with corona. Most likely the lawyer in New Rochelle was a complete super spreader. And what you had was no super spreader on board the Diamond Princess off of the coast of Japan, which is probably why the Diamond Princess, had a much lower fatality rate than the rest of the world.
Wait, so what was that thing? There was no super spreader on the Diamond Princess?
It doesn't appear that there was a super spreader on the Diamond Princess. It appears, maybe that a few people contracted it, and at such close confines, you've essentially got a lab test of human beings, in place of rats, 3,600 of them, in a contained metal system for 2 weeks. It's the ideal lab test for coronavirus spread. And without coronavirus super spreaders, the mortality rate's something like 0.85%. And in fact, the head of the University College of London said that the mortality rate of coronavirus is really 2 to 3 times worse on average than the flu. And so what's happening in Italy is you've got one of the oldest regions on the planet. First of all, Italy is like the second oldest country on the planet, but the Lombardy region is a very wealthy region from 60s, 70s, 80s, and then starting in the mid to late 80s, the Chinese came and started buying up all these apparel companies, and from Gucci to the smallest belt retailer, practically everyone has been sold. So you have a lot of capital in Italy. And so on a net-net basis, this coronavirus will be great for the Italian economy. because it's going to make healthcare cost for Italy on a go-forward basis much less. It's going to unlock a lot of capital, unfortunately due to fatalities, but that's what happens when you have, a really concentrated area of 80 and 90-year-olds who
How do
smoke also.
you? Sure. Yeah, that's right. How do you define super spreader? So is super spreader only because I want to get back to this idea of like increased fatality or lower fatality because of super spreader spreading. So I would define super spreader, I know nothing, as someone who spreads it to a lot of people. But is there another definition there that makes it more lethal?
No, really just someone who can spread it to a dozen or more people. The lawyer in New Rochelle might have spread it to anywhere from 40 to 80 different patients. As I said, Mary from 1850 spread, salmonella, typhoid to, I think it was 50 to 60 people. But, you've got a coronavirus super spreader possibly at, the Biogen conference in Boston. So, that's also another situation where you might have, almost half of the Massachusetts cases have come from this one biotechnology conference. So when you can find a huge disproportionate amount of the data coming from one source, that's a situation. Plus, something else that we've learned from the front lines is that the virus gets weaker over time, and it also gets weaker when there's less mass around it. And so, for instance, the doctor, the initial whistleblower in Wuhan who died, he was treating 100 to 200 coronavirus patients a day up close and personal. And so despite being young and not in the real ideal death group, he had so much close contact with coronavirus that it killed him. Whereas, a 75-year-old, in Florida might have some tangential exposure and be able to survive that. So, the super spreaders are, they can be very lethal because they generally have a lot of the coronavirus on them. The amount of coronavirus is important. Think of it almost as radiation. Less radiation, better.
Yeah, interesting variable. Gosh, there's so many different variables here that play in. I mean, you mentioned age, that's more obvious. Smoking is a big one, but even the amount of it you get, wow. Okay, let's talk about one more super spreader, and then I got some other big picture questions. The patient 31. So I watched this movie Contagion the other day, which is probably a bad idea because my wife's a worrier. So this wasn't a great movie to watch, but it was amazing. They were able to do to track who had it and when and reach out to these people and kind of like map it all out. And I saw the Washington Post made this graphic of each of the patients, like each of the initial patients and who they got in contact with and who they were able to map it out with incredible details, shocking. And then something about patient 31 was able to get away and infect more people, which resulted in 80% of all the infections or something in South Korea or in Seoul. I don't know. Tell us do you know more about patient 31?
Yes, exactly. No, South Korea was another example of a super spreader where you just have one patient who can spread, the virus to anywhere from 24 to nearly 100 people. So, at first we thought the virus couldn't be spread by more than, I think the CDC put out a month ago that the virus could only spread up to 2 people per host, which has turned out to be completely wrong. And in fact, I've been on the CDC calls going back to mid-January, and I really am just shocked as to how not with it they were. Really just totally unprepared, misinformation. Saying there's absolutely zero chance it can come to America. Why was there zero chance it can come to America? Why were they telling the community that? And these 90-minute conference calls were taking place almost daily at some points. And the CDC really took a U-turn. But the idea that it wouldn't spread, it's almost stupid. Of course it would spread. You had 5 million people who left Wuhan right afterwards. Only I think 3 million of them stayed within 100 miles. So you have 2 million people who dispersed around the globe. And as we know, Wuhan and northern Italy have a very, very close relationship because Wuhan is the garment center of China. And so all these wealthy Wuhanites went and, bought gigantic sprawling estates in, the Lombardy region. So you have like 300,000 Chinese nationals living in Lombardy right now. So I don't think people realize that northern Italy, Lombardy has basically become like Wuhan West. So, if people were saying, Wuhan West has a gigantic coronavirus outbreak, I think the world would be less surprised because, it's called Italy. The world is more surprised.
Wow, what a great point. So what does that mean for America? Because we don't have as close of a connection with Wuhan, but does it not matter at this point because it was able to spread so far throughout Europe that it came here?
I don't, you know, I think we're very fine. I think we are extremely fine. We are self-quarantining. We have an amazing healthcare system, and we have a few super spreaders who have been located, and as I said, we've got a lot of self-quarantining going on. I personally think this, you know, it'll linger for a little bit until we get our vaccines. But Regeneron just came up with a cure. I'm sure you saw that, and Moderna Pharmaceuticals has come up with something. So there's a lot of people racing. There's also a firm in Israel that already has a vaccine for coronavirus, but only for coronavirus in birds. And so they're just adapting the sequence to work for human beings. And there's no reason they shouldn't be able to do that. And once they've done it, Israel has like a 90-day window, much easier than the US, where I think it's going to be like 18 months. But, I think in 90 days, you'll be able to buy a coronavirus vaccine in Israel. So,
Amazing.
there's
I got one last question for you. We got about a minute and a half. Models. What do we need to know about models, right? Just, the only real model insight I have is when you look at like global warming models. And you look at it, you're like, well, you can just make the model to be whatever you want it to be. You know what I mean? Just change whatever and you don't include. So I'm looking at these healthcare models and same thing, right? You just punch in a couple different inputs, but you can't perfectly account for infinite number of inputs. So what do I need to understand and what do people need to understand about the limitations of models?
Well, I've had something like 300 students that I've taught over the last decade, and I have yet to come up with a model given to me by a student that was a failure. Every model that's ever been presented to me looked great, and so every model is as subject to failure as the person who built the model, if you understand me.
I don't. Say it again.
Okay, so of my 300 students, every model that was first brought to me looked great, but honestly, of the 300, none of them have been as strong in AI as the one we initially built over a decade ago. So essentially, there have been hundreds and hundreds of failures, but each one initially looked fantastic. And so my point is, models are, you can fudge a model, extremely easily. I'm sure Ponzi would be dealing with models if he were around today.
All right, last point. We got to go, but last point, something that you think people need to know that they're missing in this whole time.
I think people need to realize that the American healthcare system is phenomenally strong. This virus is not as bad as people are making it out to be. Frankly, I think I don't want to see people overreacting because there's no amount of caution that isn't, merited. But at the same time, people are acting like it's doomsday. It's really not doomsday. And I actually like the way the UK is playing it. If we just let this go out throughout the society, that's the best way for human beings to become immune to it. Otherwise, it'll keep coming back, the way the flu does. Of course, that's not the most sensitive way to play it. But scientifically speaking, for our children and our grandchildren, it is the most sensitive way to play it.
Yeah, I know. I've thought about it. It could be a risky play, but there's a big assumption there that you can control it, though, isn't there? What the UK is doing, that you kind of just keep it at a certain level, make sure it doesn't get too high, et cetera. There's a lot of assumptions.
You can't control it. It'll kill thousands of people. But, if we lose 50,000 people to the flu and we're not declaring a national emergency for that, why the difference?
Yeah, interesting. Okay, we got to run. Alexander Fleiss, CEO of RebellionResearch.com, AI professor at Cornell and other schools. Alexander, let's definitely talk again, certainly about AI in the future.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Love to get your take on that. All right, Slater Crusaders, appreciate you being here. We'll be back. We have more Corona specials and insight updates coming up as well. Stay here on The First. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.